Good morning. Today I'm pleased to be joined by Secretary of Public Safety Eddie Buffalo, Secretary of Transportation Joey Hopkins, Colonel Freddie Johnson with the State Highway Patrol, Major General Todd Hunt of the North Carolina National Guard, and Emergency Management Director Will Ray. Thank all of you for watching as we share the latest updates on Hurricane Erin. Hurricane Erin is currently a Category 2 hurricane that will likely strengthen over the course of the day today. The storm remains dangerous and is already impacting lots of people here in North Carolina. Folks on the coast need to take care. Based on the current forecast, we are anticipating coastal flooding from massive waves, tropical storm force winds, and tidal and storm surge for much of the state shoreline, especially the outer banks from this evening through Thursday. Life-threatening rip currents for most of the week. No one should be in the ocean. And extensive beach erosion along much of the coast. Local states of emergency have been declared in Currituck County, Dare County, and Hyde County. Mandatory evacuations are in place for Ocracoke and Hatteras Islands. If you are under an evacuation order, take action now before it's too late. You can find shelter at the state-operated disaster shelter located at 113 Wilcox Street in Warrenton, North Carolina. Pets are allowed at the shelter. I want to thank Warren County Emergency Management for hosting the shelter guests and the General Assembly for helping to fund it. Yesterday, I declared a state of emergency across North Carolina to facilitate our emergency response and to keep you safe. This statewide state of emergency enables us to send critical resources from across the state and around the country to respond. We've activated a cross-agency storm response that includes the Department of Public Safety, the Department of Transportation, the North Carolina National Guard, the State Highway Patrol, and many local partners. Our state emergency response team stands ready to quickly and decisively respond to any needs along the coast. We have already pre-positioned 3 swiftwater rescue teams and 200 National Guard troops to various locations on the coast, along with boats, high-clearance vehicles, and aircraft. We have on standby some Chinooks from Georgia ready to transport food and water if it becomes necessary. Momentarily, you will hear from Director Ray about the hurricane and our emergency response operations. Right now, I want to emphasize the importance of taking this storm seriously because it's a serious storm and conditions can deteriorate quickly. Please take these steps to ensure your safety. First, stay informed. Follow reputable sources of information like the National Weather Service and local media so you know the latest about the storm risks. I strongly encourage you to register online right now for emergency text and phone alerts from your county emergency management agency. Second, get your disaster kit ready. Think about what you would need after a major storm. Things like enough food, water, and supplies for 3 to 5 days for each person and pet in your household, a flashlight and fresh batteries, a battery-operated radio. Next, have a plan. In case you have to evacuate, build a go bag of cash, prescriptions, phone chargers, and important documents like insurance policies and other personal and financial records. Take photos of whatever you own that is valuable in case it gets destroyed. Know your evacuation plan and how to connect with your family after the storm. Write down their phone numbers on a piece of paper if you have not memorized them. Visit knowyourzone.nc.gov for more information. And finally, do not drive through flood waters. Too many people have died driving into flooded roadways. Don't do it. You do not know how deep the water is or how fast it is running. So please, don't drown, turn around. We do not want you to become a casualty of Hurricane Erin. With ocean overwash, we anticipate impacts to our roadways, especially NC Highway 12. For the most up-to-date roadway information, visit drivenc.gov. For more information about the storm, preparations, evacuation orders, open shelters, or other important tips, visit readync.gov/Erin. Our American Sign Language interpreters today are Mark Lineberger and Stephen Holland. Behind the scenes, our Spanish language interpreters are Jackie Matevier and Yasmin Palizzi. At this time, I'll turn it over to Director Will Ray.
Thank you, Governor, and good morning, everyone. Erin remains a dangerous hurricane, but as the Governor mentioned, the storm is forecast to remain offshore. While it may fluctuate in strength over the next day or so, Erin will remain a hurricane while making its closest approach to North Carolina late today and into tomorrow. The system is expected to turn northward today and then northeastward tomorrow, gaining forward speed while moving away from North Carolina. A tropical storm warning is now in effect from Beaufort Inlet north to Duck, and a storm surge warning is now in effect from Cape Lookout to Duck. If you've been asked to evacuate, please do so now, before conditions deteriorate and roads become impassable. Do not drive around barricades and do not drive through flooded waters. You cannot judge the depth or speed of floodwaters from inside your vehicle. I want to remind everyone, regardless of the track of the center of the storm, dangerous conditions can be felt far from the eye, especially with a system as large as Erin. Regardless of her track, moderate to locally significant impacts are expected along our coast and expected to peak today and into tomorrow. Extremely large, dangerous waves forecasted around 20 feet in height, along with storm surge of 2 to 4 feet on top of the surf, will likely impact the dunes along portions of the North Carolina coast, especially east and southeast facing beaches and the Outer Banks. Numerous roadways will likely become impassable, especially on Highway 12, as the Governor mentioned, and in communities on the barrier islands. This will be a longer duration event, with coastal flooding expected over several high tide cycles. We will see rain bands trailing Erin that will also impact the area, already saturated soils across the area, which could lead to extended impacts. Please be sure to have multiple ways to receive weather alerts, especially during the overnight hours. You need to be informed by receiving information from reputable sources of information and have a plan to protect yourself and your family. Hurricane Erin is already creating extremely dangerous and life-threatening rip currents for all of the North Carolina coast that will linger through the week. We've seen a high number of rescues along the coast, and you should avoid swimming anywhere on the North Carolina coast right now. The State Emergency Response Team began preparations late last week, as soon as forecasts began to indicate that North Carolina may receive impacts. And today, the State Emergency Operations Center is activated, as is our Regional Coordination Center East in Kinston, to facilitate the movement of resources and commodities into impacted communities and to support local response. Yesterday, North Carolina Emergency Management deployed 3 of our state's swiftwater rescue teams from partners in the North Carolina Marine Patrol, North Carolina Wildlife Resources, and a joint team made up of the Wake Forest Fire Department and Knightdale Fire Department, as well as 3 of our state's search and rescue task forces from Buncombe County, the Charlotte Fire Department, and the Greensboro Fire Department, all of which have water rescue, structural collapse, and wide area search capabilities. These search and rescue assets are positioned in eastern North Carolina to quickly respond to assist first responders and local emergency managers with response needs. We've activated approximately 200 North Carolina National Guardsmen with high clearance vehicles and positioned them across the coastal plain to support quick response into those impacted communities. Aircraft have been placed on standby from the North Carolina National Guard and the State Highway Patrol to support rescue needs as well as movement of commodities, teams, or equipment. With the potential for roadways to be impassable for multiple days, we are also activating the additional heavy lift aircraft that the Governor mentioned from neighboring states to support large-scale movement as a contingency plan. Our logistics teams remain ready to support commodity distribution from our warehouses and partners into those impacted areas. Additional local emergency managers and public safety personnel have deployed from non-impacted portions of our state to serve on incident management teams, which will assist those impacted communities. The North Carolina Department of Transportation has equipment and personnel staged and ready to clear roadways along the coast as conditions improve later this week, and the North Carolina Highway Patrol is working to ensure safe evacuation routes and that road closures are put into place when necessary. As the governor mentioned, there have been evacuation orders for visitors and residents in portions of Dare and Hyde counties, particularly Hatteras and Ocracoke, and those orders do remain in place. Anyone in those areas should heed these evacuation orders for your own safety and as well as other direction from public safety officials. For anyone evacuating that needs somewhere to stay, a state-operated shelter is open and is safely located in Warrenton. As the governor mentioned, pets are welcome at this shelter, and you can find information by visiting readync.gov/Erin. Finally, I want to mention that while all eyes are on Erin and its impacts to our coast and those communities, North Carolina emergency management personnel and our local emergency management partners remain also focused on facilitating recovery efforts across Western North Carolina. The Joint Recovery Office remains open in Asheville without interruption, as are the multi-agency recovery centers, which have served over 6,800 Helene survivors to date. Areas in our central part of the state have also recently experienced impacts from Tropical Storm Chantal, and those disaster recovery centers remain open in local communities that were impacted. State individual assistance is available to those Chantal survivors while we await a decision from the federal government on North Carolina's request for a major disaster declaration for public assistance, which would provide additional recovery resources to those impacted communities and our state. Please remain informed and have a plan to protect yourself today, tonight, and tomorrow if you are along our coast. I continue to be incredibly proud of the partnerships of our state emergency response team. 1.8 million North Carolinians we all serve. Together, we are stronger and more resilient. Thank you, Governor.
At this time, happy to take questions from the room to any of the participants on the stage. Please just go to either side to ask your question.
Thanks, Governor. Laura Leslie with WRAL. We reported yesterday that we're still waiting for hundreds of millions of dollars, I gather, from aid from FEMA. Can you talk about whether that's going to impact our ability to respond to Erin? And, has the federal government been a good partner in getting ready for this hurricane season?
Well, I want to acknowledge and express my appreciation to FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security. Yesterday, we got word that about $85 million of the previously approved projects, that reimbursement will be released. We've not yet received the money, but every indication is that those funds will be coming shortly. Now, we still have $100 million in other projects that are due for reimbursement, and it creates real financial strain, especially for the local governments, but also the state. And so we'll continue to work with our federal partners to make sure that the reimbursements are processed as quickly as possible. And then we'll have to wait and see what the impacts are for Hurricane Erin to see whether we need federal assistance as it relates to this storm.
Is this taking longer than usual?
I think it has taken longer than usual. That's true.
And just one follow-up question, and that's about reputable information. You mentioned that, and so did Director Ray. We've seen a lot of misinformation and AI on social media out there about this storm in particular. Is there anything the state can do about that? And what do you recommend that people do in order to make sure they're not getting taken in by scams or other misinformation?
I think if you want to truly know what's going on with the storm, I would watch weather channels. I would watch local TV news. I would listen to the National Weather Service. I would go to those sources. I would not get my information from social media. It is just too easy for salacious, really dramatic stories to take root and spread like wildfire, even in a hurricane, because that's what people click on. Don't get your news from social media. If you see something on social media that sparks your interest, just go to a traditional website or news source and find out whether it's true.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Dina Harley with CBS 17. I have two questions. One being, with Tropical Storm Chantal, you did not declare a state of emergency right away because that was not a statewide event, but this one isn't either. So can you explain the difference there? And then the second question, another financial one, we obviously still don't have a state budget, which means the rainy day fund also hasn't been replenished. If you can just talk about, like, state-wise, financially, how that works for storms like this while we're still waiting for a budget.
Yes. In terms of declaring the statewide emergency, this was going to impact many counties. And when we saw the weather projections, we couldn't anticipate how far west it would go. And by declaring that state emergency, it enabled us to leverage a lot of resources. It also allowed us to make changes on our transportation regulations. The Highway Patrol has to, when there's a heavy truck, if they see a heavy truck, they have to stop it and ticket it if it is excessive in size. Well, by declaring the statewide emergency, we could allow the Highway Patrol to let these heavy trucks go on roads that are safe, not on bridges that can't sustain the weight, to pre-position to respond to whatever impacts the storm are. It also enabled us to reach out to our neighboring states. We don't have the big Chinook helicopters that can move food and water, so it allowed us to trigger that as well. That's why we did it. The Chantal was a much more localized event, but then we came to the conclusion that it would help to declare a state emergency to trigger the relief that was necessary for those impacted people. And then what was your other question was on the money?
Yes.
These guys have enough money in their account to respond to the storm. Clearly, we need to engage with the General Assembly to make sure that going forward, we have adequate resources to respond to storms like this.
Thank you.
Hi, Brandon Kingdollar from NC Newsline. I wanted to ask what you'd heard from the federal government so far in preparing for Hurricane Erin. Have you gotten any indication that you'll get maybe more cooperation from them than with other storms?
In terms of the federal response, the nature of this storm is such that we haven't needed to call upon those resources to respond to the immediate aftermath of the storm. I'll have the director come forward and talk about his conversations with the Coast Guard and the EPA and others. We don't know what the extent of the damage is going to be. If it ends up being substantial, then at that point, we're going to have to reach out to the federal government to help us with the recovery, and we just have to wait and see. I'm hopeful that they will respond favorably.
Okay, thank you.
And why don't you talk about your response to the federal government?
Thank you, sir. So I think just in follow-up, I think a couple of things. We have talked to FEMA leadership over the last couple of days and what we may need. And so I think have very good open dialogue with senior FEMA leadership right now, if there should be a need, as well as out of our regional headquarters that's based in Atlanta. At this point, as the governor said, I think we're not anticipating significant federal resources to support response. I think as we move through the event, we will continue to reassess that. I think it's also important to note that here in North Carolina, and I think you've heard us talk about this before, we have what's called a FEMA integration team. So we actually have a small team from FEMA across their different parts of their agency that are embedded here with our team every single day. We work alongside with them, so they are here daily working with us. We also have some specialists from the National Hurricane Center that are also embedded with our weather team day to day. I think as the governor mentioned, I think one of the areas we are looking at that often impacts coastal events is when we see some of the coordination around abandoned vessels or derelict vessels, anything that could lead to hazardous materials being in waterways. And those are conversations we've been having over the course of this week with the various federal agencies, so EPA, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Coast Guard, on how we, one, support life safety missions in those impacted areas, but also have the right federal resources postured should we need it to deal with some of the infrastructure impacts there.
Thanks, Will.
Or the Governor, Dwan Hogard, WTVD. First things, after the response of Helene, and even now how folks there in the western part of the state are still recovering right now, what lessons have you learned from that major event, and how are you applying it to Hurricane Erin? And then secondly, I know you guys are having those conversations at the federal level. A lot of folks in the western part of the state were probably expecting something a little bit more, maybe from a state and federal level. How confident are you that the state will get what it needs from the federal government if you have to make that phone call?
Yeah, we've had healthy working relationships with the federal government over these past 11 months since Hurricane Helene swept through western North Carolina. In terms of the extent of federal support, it has not met the need. If you aggregate all of the different types of federal relief we've gotten, whether it was through FEMA or the U.S. Department of Transportation or the Army Corps of Engineers or whatever Small Business Administration, we're at about 8% of the overall damages, which was $60 billion. So we're grateful for every dollar that we get. But when you look at historically other major storms, the average is in the 40% range. Some storms got upwards of 70% of the overall damage in support from the federal government. So the federal government has not met the moment. We're going to continue to make our case to our congressional delegation and to the administration to urge them to support Western North Carolina to the degree that is necessary. In terms of what lessons that are learned from that relationship to the east, we just have to wait and see what the extent of the damage is and whether it has any impacts on our ongoing ability to get the support we need from the federal government. I think these folks, they know how to respond to a storm. They know how to analyze the type of storm that's coming. They know what assets to pre-position. There are 4 different sites in eastern North Carolina where there are National Guard troops. There are the swiftwater rescue teams from other local government agencies and from state agencies that will reference. And so I have every confidence that they know what they need to do in order to respond to what's going to. We've gotten good response from our congressional delegation. They've been helpful at every step of the way. We now are at the next stage, which is we need a lot of help for Western North Carolina, and we hope that that funding will come.
Thank you.
Well,
Hey, Governor Will Doran from WRAL. You spoke about the concerns with Highway 12. Director Ray spoke about that as well. And I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars the state has spent on that one specific road in recent years, but are there broader conversations that we need to be having about the viability of those roads or other coastal roads so that there isn't as much damage every single time we get a hurricane coming through?
yeah, well, we'll just obviously have to wait and see what the extent of the damage is with this storm. Look, people love our Outer Banks. It's a national treasure, and you need to be able to get to them. We have ferries that take us to the islands, but this is an important road for North Carolina. There's so many people live there. There's so much tourism dollars that goes on that road. It is an important asset to the state, and then we need to do everything we can to protect and preserve it. And I'll see if Secretary Hopkins wants to add any words on NC-12.
Yeah, thank you, Governor. First of all, I would agree. NC-12 is the interstate of the Outer Banks, and it's important that we keep it viable. We keep it where the goods, commodities, the tourists, and the residents can use it. Longer term, we are doing a number of studies, working with some the institutions, the educational institutions in the state, and also the local governments, looking at our assets out there and what we need to do as far as potentially making it more resilient, potentially relocating to a higher area and what we can do there. And there'll be ongoing studies as we move through, not just with NC-12, but also our ferry assets out at Ocracoke and Hatteras and other points on the Outer Banks.
Thanks, George.
Hey, Governor Patrick Thomas with Spectrum News 1. You touched a lot on evacuations, and I'm curious as to how much these evacuation mandates are sort of out of abundance of caution because of what has been learned from previous storms, from Chantal, Helene, up until now.
Yeah, well, when there is a major storm, when there is flooding, there is great risk of death. And what we don't want is for people to die. And the local governments were the ones who declared the evacuation orders. They know their community, their geography, their evacuation routes the best. So we are supportive of those orders. We're going to do everything in our power to keep people safe. If you are on one of the 2 islands, Hatteras or Ocracoke, and can get off still, the ferries I think are running for another hour or 2, we urge you to do that. And if you have not evacuated, make sure you batten down the hatches.
And Governor, as a follow-up, what is your real level of confidence that FEMA will answer the call for what has already happened with Helene, but also because of what happened in Kirk County, Texas, and the slow response, that if anything does come of this with Hurricane Erin, they'd be able to help the state of North Carolina?
Clearly, there's a lot of turmoil or consternation in Washington about what to do with FEMA. I mean, the president initially declared he wanted to get rid of FEMA. He's created a FEMA review council. I think the latest indication is that they're going to keep and reform FEMA. That is an outcome that I heartily embrace. There are things we can do that will help FEMA serve our people better. But we absolutely need the partnership of the federal government. These storms, this one appears to be localizing on North Carolina, but many of the storms hit an entire region. The scale of these storms are massive, $60 billion in western North Carolina from Hurricane Erin. Those kind of resources don't exist in western North Carolina to respond. Heck, our state 2-year budget is $66 billion. So essentially we would have to forego the entire 2-year budget just to get western North Carolina back to where it was before. The only institution that has the kind of resources and the expertise on a regional level to respond is the federal government. That is why it is essential that we keep and improve FEMA on a going forward basis. We will continue to engage our federal partners to have a constructive, positive relationship to make sure that the people of western North Carolina, the people of eastern North Carolina, the coast, people in central, we have a public assistance request before FEMA as it relates to Chantal right now. So we need their help, their partnership, and we are eager to continue to develop that.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.